Okay, hi everybody. So the purpose of this video is to discuss the final essay. And you can see pictured on your screen is the final essay instruction sheet available on Canvas under, I believe it's called Final Module. And you just click on Final Essay, and then you can see the instructions basically for the final essay. And then you should be able to see the instructions on your screen here as well. So I think I'm going to spend most of this video going through the instructions and just kind of adding in details and emphasizing certain things and anticipating certain questions and making clarifications and that kind of thing. Before I do that, I wanted to touch on a couple of things. First of all, so you might be wondering why I set the class up this way. So wanted to kind of explain this. So what I'm referring to is, so we have 6 modules in the class, 6 content modules basically, and then we're done with the content part of the class, like learning a new part, discussing, trying to better understand, engaging with a new part of the second half of American history. We're done with that on August 3rd at the end of the 6th module. And then we have this final essay module that goes from August 3rd to the end of the class, basically August 8th. And by the way, this final essay is due August 8th, end of the day. End of the day, August 8th. But anyway, so why did I set it up that way? And basically the reason is that this essay, so the book that you're reading and the essay that you're writing, whether you choose option 1 or option 2, and I'll talk more about that. But this essay is about the rise of basically resurgence of American conservatism after World War II, and specifically starting around the late 1960s and early 1970s. Basically late 20th century conservative renaissance, right? And so, I was thinking about it and I thought, if I just did this the way I do, if I organized this class the way I organize most other courses, where essentially we're covering content all the way up until the last day. You're theoretically watching lecture videos, you're reading secondary and primary sources, dealing with content, basically learning new content up until potentially the very last day of class. And I thought that wouldn't work necessarily in this case, right? I can't expect you to know about the rise to really understand in any kind of in-depth way the rise of American conservatism in the late 20th century. Basically that's a prerequisite for writing this essay, right? So it makes sense to cover this first, and then sort of step back and think about how you're going to write this essay and then actually execute the writing of the essay. And also, I would say to a certain extent as well, just understanding Lisa McGurr's Suburban Warriors, The Origins of the New American Right, the book that you're reading for this essay, it's to a certain extent predicated on some understanding of the broader context of the rise of conservatism, during this era. So that's kind of why I put this together this way. It's really up to you how you want to do this. I would recommend, and I think I put this into my outlines, module outlines, starting I think with module 4 and then continuing on to module 5 and module 6. Which is basically, I'm encouraging you to at least begin reading Suburban Warriors, The Origins of the New American Right. But maybe you want to hold off reading the whole thing or really engaging with it in a really in-depth, detailed way until you've at least watched the lecture video for module 6, done the textbook reading, or at least a portion of the textbook reading for module 6 that deals with the rise of American conservatism, right? Then you can really engage with Lisa McGurr's Suburban Warriors and really understand the broader context for that, and kind of put this all together into this essay, which is what I'm talking about in this video. Again, you don't have to do it that way necessarily, but that's kind of how I would recommend it. So That's kind of the first thing. Second thing, before I dive into the specific instructions here, let me talk about why I chose this topic and why I chose Lisa McGirr's Suburban Warriors specifically. So, there's lots of different, I designed this final paper, there's lots of different topics within the context of, the second half of American history that I could have chosen, right? Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, the Great Depression, lots of different things to, potentially to focus on, right? So why did I choose the rise of, conservatism and specifically conservative populism in the late 20th century? And why did I choose this McGirr book to have you guys, engage with? Lots of, great history books and articles to choose from. What was it about this book? You might be wondering, and and more generally this topic. So I would say a couple of things. I think that the rise of conservatism in the late 20th century is really, really important, and it's not very well understood, basically. There's, it's a couple of things. So I think our contemporary politics is in many ways shaped by this era. So if you think about how much contemporary politics relates to, really a couple of different things that are related, which is number one, the size and scope and role of government, and specifically the federal government, right? So that's been a theme throughout all of American history, really, and certainly that's been hugely important in the second half of American history, the subject and scope of this course. But that's especially important to the rise of conservative populism in a place like Orange County, which is what the McGirr book is about. That's especially important. That's a really important theme when you're talking about the rise of conservatism in the late 20th century, and that helps to shape the way things played out into the 21st century in American politics, the dividing lines between liberals and conservatives and Democrats and Republicans, and continues to a certain extent this day. A lot of what these fights are about is, again, the size and scope and scale of government and the proper role of government, right? In the present and in the future, and also the cultural wars, right? Abortion, prayer in schools, right? These, minority rights, gay rights, civil liberties, the role of religion in public life. These are issues that continue to shape our politics in a myriad of ways, right? And I think there's, in classes like this, certainly different history instructors and professors approach things differently and emphasize certain things and de-emphasize other things. And that's all fine and well. My impression is that there tends to be a lot of focus on the civil rights movement, which, certainly is important. But there's not as much focus on the backlash to the civil rights movement, which you focus on, if you really understand the civil rights movement of the 1960s and into the 1970s and beyond, and you really understand the conservative backlash to that, then I think that puts you in a position to really understand contemporary American politics and how that relates to various trends in American culture and in American society and gender relations and lots of different things. Basically, that fight between liberals and conservatives in the 1960s and 1970s really shapes contemporary American society. But really understanding conservative resurgence, I think, is something that is lacking in a lot of cases. And it's not that surprising if you think about it. Academics, professors, instructors, and not just the people teaching these kinds of courses in the humanities and social sciences, and specifically history courses like this one, but also university students and university administrators. And of course, there's exceptions to this, but in general, all the people that I just mentioned tend to lean left, tend to lean liberal, and thus, and therefore, tend to not, there tend to not be a whole lot of conservatives among the people I just mentioned, especially university, history professors. There tend to not be a whole lot of populists, and certainly not a whole lot of like self-described conservative populists, right? And it's not that it's impossible for you to understand something when you're not of that milieu, right? I mean, that's what historians do, right? Or at least what we should do is trying to understand movements and events and ideas that are, seem strange and foreign, right? And if they're ideas from the past, right, they're going to be in many ways strange and foreign and hard to sort of make sense of, but that's our job as historians, to try and make sense of them. But I think when it comes to conservative populism, and specifically conservative populism in the late 20th century and how it continues on to this day with the phenomenon of Trump and Trump voters and support for Trump. I think that a lot of people within the milieu of the university have trouble sort of making sense and really understanding these people and why what makes them tick and what informs their sort of political orientation and why they vote the way they do, and et cetera. So I think I just kind of thought this is an opportunity to better understand a really important historical force, which is conservative populism in the late 20th century. And let me just clarify, like, I'm not, just in general, I don't see teaching as I'm trying to get you to think a certain way. I'm just trying to get you to think, right? I'm not trying to get you to be necessarily more sympathetic to the conservative point of view. I think I'll just say these people believe a lot of things that I definitely, are hard to stomach from my perspective. But I think, and at the same time, some of you might sympathize with this point of view, and that's totally fine. I think from whatever political orientation you approach this assignment with and approach reading this book and thinking about the conservative movement, from a certain perspective, I think your perspective will be well served by attempting to better understand this movement. If that sort of makes sense. Okay, so let's get into this instruction sheet. So instruction: students will write an essay responding to either the Explaining the Rise of Conservatism prompt or the Understanding American Populism prompt. Regardless of which option you choose, you will write an analytical essay of at least 5 pages, analyzing Lisa McGirr's Suburban Warriors within the context of other topics discussed in this course. Okay, so step 1, read McGirr's Suburban Warriors, The Origins of the New American Right. And as I mentioned before, I'll just mention it again, this book is available for free as an ebook via the ASU Library's OneSearch system. And I showed you in the welcome orientation video how to access the book. So if you're having trouble, you can email me and I'll try and kind of walk you through that. But you should be able to access this book for free. There's no reason to go out and buy it, but certainly you could do that if you choose to. And it says, yes, see final essay instructions video for guidance on how to approach this book, which is the video I'm doing right now. Okay, so step 2, and by the way, I'm going to talk more about how to approach reading this book in a second here. So I'll come back to that. But yeah, basically step 2 is to choose either the option 1 or option 2 essay prompt. And let's read through these prompts and talk about them. So option 1 is titled Explaining the Rise of Conservatism. It says the literary critic Lionel Trilling announced in 1950 that in the United States at this time, liberalism is not only the dominant, but even the sole intellectual tradition. For it is the plain fact, that nowadays there are no conservative or reactionary ideas in general circulation, end quote. As the aforementioned quote illustrates, conservatism seemed to be marginal in the very liberal environment of mid-20th century America, assumed to be an outdated ideology of the disaffected. Conservatism was associated with conspiracy theories, anti-Semitism, and preferences for social hierarchy over equality. However, in the 1950s, and into the 1960s, conservatism was reborn, leading to a new era of conservative dominance in the realms of politics, culture, economics, and foreign policy in the last few decades of the 20th century. And here's the objective. Here's what you're doing for this essay if you choose this option. It says, write an essay that addresses the following question. What explains the rise of conservatism in this era? What were conservatism's most important political, cultural, and economic manifestations and animating forces? What were the limits of conservatism's power, or how did liberalism continue to exercise influence over American life, excuse me, in the late 20th century? Okay, and it says, please utilize your textbook readings, primary source documents, my lectures, and of course, McGruer's Suburban Warriors to answer the question. Your essay should include at least 4 distinct explanations for, or basically factors in the rise of conservatism. Hint, one could argue that McGruer's kitchen table activists, and you probably do want to make this some version of this argument, right, contributed significantly to conservatism's rebirth. This could be one explanation for the conservative resurgence. You could also, or should also, make use of the aforementioned sources. Cite your sources. I'll talk more about that. No credit without citation, and should also include a brief summary of McGruer's book. The best papers will not simply summarize different ideas slash aspects of conservatism's resurgence, but will also construct an argument in favor of a particular point of view on the question. And I'll get into an example of that in a second. But